I'm Patricia Karvelas, live from the lands of the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne. Welcome to Afternoon Briefing. China says it will hold firm on retaliatory tariffs after US President Donald Trump threatened the nation with a 104% tariff. It follows a stock market meltdown in the US and at home. Both Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton have been making the case that they are the safest pair of hands through economic uncertainty ahead of the election. Now, the government says it will make mental health care more affordable after a $1 billion pledge to build and upgrade dozens of free mental health centres. The Prime Minister says their plan would improve access to support, while the Coalition says their policy would see Australians get more subsidised care. I'll speak to the Shadow Health Minister, Anne Ruston, in just a moment. A recently dumped federal Liberal candidate says his views against women serving in combat are no different to other senior members of the party, including Shadow Defence Minister Andrew Hastie. Andrew Hastie says he has no connection to the candidate, former soldier Benjamin Britten, who was disendorsed for the New South Wales seat of Whitlam. Will this prove a problem for the Coalition? I'll ask my panel, Kelly and Andrew Carswell, shortly. Beginning with that mental health announcement today, the Prime Minister became emotional speaking about a near-death mental health experience of a friend while announcing the policy, which he says is a key part of their health platform.
A young woman, a friend of mine's niece, who had an issue, ended up in RPA with an eating disorder. And that was really confronting. I was still pretty young at the time. I hadn't seen anything like that. She almost died. She is now well. She is now well and has children of her own. But that was really confronting that occurred. But this announcement isn't an add-on. This is a central part of our health policy that we're taking to this election.
To get the Coalition's response to this, let's bring in the Shadow Health Minister, Anne Ruston. Anne Ruston, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Patricia.
Let's begin on mental health. Federal Labor has promised to invest $1 billion in the expansion of affordable mental health services across Australia if they're elected. The national peak body, Mental Health Australia, has said the commitment is a landmark investment. Now, I know you've also made mental health announcements. They're similar, but there are some differences. Will you match the parts that Labor has announced today?
Well, obviously, we absolutely welcome the components, particularly of this announcement, that match the components that we had in our announcement, making sure that young Australians get access to headspace services, something that we started when we were in government and something that we're extremely proud of. Also making sure that head-to-health services for older Australians who also are facing challenges with mental health, that they're able to get access to that as well. So very, very welcoming of the announcements that they've made today that match the announcements that we have been talking about for the last 3 years. But the thing I suppose I was most disappointed about today, Patricia, is despite the sector saying that access to Medicare subsidised mental health sessions that was slashed in half by the Labor, Albanese Labor government in January 2023, they haven't been reinstated. We also were disappointed that they didn't match our commitment to set up a world-leading institute to make sure that decisions around making sure that we've got the world's best response to mental health, particularly youth mental health, was able to be managed and established and coordinated through that body. So welcome the parts that they've put in place that support what we'd already committed to, but a little disappointed they didn't go to the whole way.
Labor has argued, though, that its Medicare mental health centres will take pressure off the Better Access scheme and offer free walk-in support. Do you accept that that's a good model for people to be able to obtain care?
Well, the head-to-health centres that you're talking about was something that was established under the Coalition government, and of course we very much support Australians being able to get access to the mental health services that they need. But one of the things that was very, very clear and the sector had been saying to us, firstly is access to the number of sessions that you are diagnosed as needing, which is what was happening under the Medicare subsidised mental health sessions when they were at a higher number. Like any other health condition, you would not be rationing doubling the amount of support that somebody needed that had been clinically diagnosed. So we're disappointed about that, but of course the Head to Health centres was something we established. We're very pleased that they are going to continue on with that particular program. Somewhat disappointed that they thought that they should spend millions of dollars changing the name of these centres, but nonetheless we do support the Head to Health concept, of course, because it was something we put in place in the first place.
Now, Labor, in their announcement, has an adult component and a workforce component that your policy doesn't have. I've called some experts today just to get to the heart of where the differences are. Just why did you choose not to address those areas, and are you considering looking at that workforce component?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to do with our world-leading institute around mental health was to make sure that we brought the sector together so that they could inform us about all of the stages of making sure that we had the best trained and most appropriate workforce to respond to this epidemic of mental health, particularly in young Australians. So we wanted to make sure that the experts had a big role in deciding in terms of attraction, incentives, retention, and how we actually managed our workforce going forward. But particularly when it came to making sure that all Australians had adequate access to the mental health supports they needed, which was why we listened to the sector when they said that we should reinstate the Medicare mental health sessions that were being subsidised by the government, that were cut in half by this government. That was why we said that we believed that that was important. 372,000 Australians were impacted by that decision back in January 2023. And the Minister's own department has said that it was that they have failed when it comes to
that
mental
critique,
health.
but on the mental health workforce, Peter Dutton wouldn't say this morning whether he would match that commitment to grow the mental health workforce. Without the growth of the mental health workforce, being able to actually deliver services is obviously very difficult. Do you have a plan for how you're going to build it?
Well, look, we've been saying right the way through this 3-year term that we needed to address the workforce across the entire care sector. I mean, we've seen it in just about every aspect of our health sector and our care sector that we're struggling for workforce. But in relation to mental health, we know it's a very specialised workforce, and that's why we want the sector to advise us about how best to address this. We're not going to make knee-jerk policy announcements 3 weeks out from an election. We're going to work with the sector as we have for the last 3 years. Because let's not forget, this is the first time we've heard anything from this government on mental health apart from cutting sessions and reinstating programs they tried to cut in the budget. I mean, there's nothing in the budget. This is an election commitment. 3 weeks out from the election, we are very, very focused on making sure, and as we have for the last 3 years, mental health has always been a priority of the Coalition. It was when we were in government, and we want to reinstate mental health as a priority, a national priority, should we be elected.
The College of Psychiatrists wanted the Coalition, suggested that you should be, though, working on expanding the workforce. Do you make a commitment that that is the direction you'll move in? Because that is obviously the overwhelming concern of the sector.
Look, absolutely, we have to make sure that we've both got the size of the workforce and the appropriate workforce to respond to all of the healthcare needs of Australians. We know that workforce has been a great challenge over recent years, and it's something that we have to focus on, which is why I have been particularly critical through the last 3 years of this government's lack of focus on workforce. So absolutely it is a critical element of making sure that Australians get access to the care they need, the affordable access to the care they need, because the fact of the matter right now is it's never been harder or more expensive to be able to get care in this country.
Do you struggle to get traction on health? Because we've seen a kind of common story over the last period of time where you've matched other announcements by Labor, but they haven't been the Coalition's original policies. I know on mental health there's been a specific policy, but on the other policies it's been a sort of matching. Why has that been the approach that you've taken?
Well, there'd be two things I'd say there, Patricia. Obviously, we have been very clear about our support for mental health right the way through this term of government. Secondly, we know that there's an absolute crisis in primary care in this country at the moment. As I said, never been harder or more expensive to see a doctor. We know out-of-pocket costs have never been higher. Bulk billing rates have dropped. 1.5 million Australians said they didn't see the doctor last year because they simply couldn't afford to. So we knew that we needed to make an investment in primary care so that we could halt this trend, which is why we are very supportive of the $9 billion investment that we're putting into primary care in this country, because we need to make an investment investment in primary care, because if we look at prevention, we look at early intervention, we look at an investment in primary care, it's actually an investment in a healthy Australia, because right now we're seeing, because people aren't getting that care, they're ending up in emergency departments like the Royal North Shore Hospital just down here from where I'm standing today. The pressure on emergency departments we're seeing ramping through the roof, we're seeing elective surgery waiting lists longer than we've ever seen before. That is largely driven by the fact that we have a primary care crisis. We must invest in primary care if we're going to invest in a healthy nation.
But beyond mental health care, if you look at the pattern, it's been the coalition matching announcements made by Labor. So I'm going to put this to you. I've heard your leader and actually the Prime Minister talk about, dental on Medicare being something that they think sounds good but won't commit to. Given you've often followed in the other areas, not mental health, why not lead on dental on Medicare and force Labor's hand on that question?
Well, look, I think we have been leading with everything that we've been saying in the last 3 years around prevention and primary care being the focus of where we need to go as a nation when it comes to our healthcare sector. But the really disappointing thing, Patricia, and we've seen it over the last few months, is this is a government that's prepared to tell lies about the coalition and our intentions in relation to Medicare. We are absolutely committed to Medicare remaining the absolute centrepiece of primary care. We have committed to continue to increase funding into Medicare into the future. We are absolutely committed in making sure that Medicare forms the basis of our healthy nation going forward. And yet all we've got is Anthony Albanese and Mark Butler and the Labor Party out there telling flat out lies, absolutely, completely untrue statements around the coalition and Medicare. And I just want to put that to bed, that is not what we're intending to do. We are committed to Medicare.
They keep mentioning Peter Dutton's previous record as Health Minister, particularly the co-payment, which was incredibly unpopular as an idea. Is that hard for you as the spokesperson to try, as you say, to put it to bed, to neutralise the issue when you carry that baggage?
Look, I think it's about time that the government stopped talking about something that didn't happen over a decade ago and start talking about what is actually happening right now and what has happened over the last 3 years, where their track record has been absolutely abysmal. And we need to talk about what we want the future vision for our nation to be when it comes to health going forward. That's what I'm focused on. While they're running around doing the scare tactics and talking about things that are over a decade old, I want to focus on making sure that I've got an Australia that has a healthcare system that supports their needs into the future. That's what I'm focused on.
I just want to get a couple of comments from you on some other things. The dumped candidate for Whitlam, Ben Britton, had said some pretty controversial things. Now he says that what's happening in New South Wales is that the right division is trying to essentially get themselves ready to roll Peter Dutton. I'm sure you're across this story today because it's quite wild that the things that he says is happening in the back room. You're in New South Wales. Is there an attempt, a factional attempt, to kind of do the numbers to try and move on Peter Dutton post-election?
Well, nothing could be more ridiculous. Peter Dutton is doing an amazing job of leading the coalition into this election. He has done an amazing job of keeping a coordinated team together over the last 3 years. We're focused on the people of Australia and making sure that we're delivering on the things that they need. Right now, cost of living could not be a bigger issue, and health is another victim of cost of living, which is why I'm so focused on making sure that people get affordable access to healthcare. So I'm absolutely focused, as is Peter Dutton, as is the rest of the team, in making sure that we're focused on the Australian public, the 3rd of May, and giving them a good plan and a credible plan to make sure that they know that we've got their backs when it comes to the post-election, because we want to get Australia back on track. We want them to live back in the luckiest country in the world. Right now, I don't think Australians are feeling terribly lucky under this government.
Peter Dutton says a recession will happen under Labor. So if the coalition is elected, could you really stop a recession?
Well, the one thing I think that the track record of the coalition that stands absolutely head and shoulders above any Labor government this country has ever had is that we are good economic managers, and our track record shows that. We want to make sure that we're investing in the future of the nation. We want to make sure that we are actually addressing the issues that are most important to Australians. And, right now there could be nothing more important than getting energy bills down, making sure that we get interest rates down so that people's mortgages are more affordable. We want to get young Australians into their own home a dream
understand
that
all
is
of
slowly
that. I don't
slipping
mean to
away from
be
them.
rude and interrupt, but just specifically, could a coalition really avoid Australia going into recession if you win on May 3rd?
Look, we are absolutely confident that the strong plan that we have, that we're putting to the Australian public at this election, is something that will make sure that Australian as economy is absolutely strong, that it is supporting Australians to make sure that they regain the lifestyle that they've lost over the last 3 years. So I am very confident that we have a proven track record of economic management. We've done it before and we will do it again.
Anne Ruston, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, PK.
Returning to our top story, the US President Donald Trump was resolute in the face of continued market crashes and China's retaliatory tariffs. He told reporters in the Oval Office that he will speak with China, but it would be America first in any deal.
We'll be talking to China. We'll be talking to a lot of different countries. And I think, you know, if we can make a really fair deal and a good deal for the United States, not a good deal for others. This is America first. It's now America first.
Back home, the fallout in the stock market has sparked fears of a global recession. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was cautious when asked if Australia was prepared for a recession, talking about the success of government policy and claiming they were in a better economic position than the one they inherited.
That hard work that we have done, if we had not have done that, we wouldn't have been as prepared for what is happening in the global economy. We'll continue to engage, but I tell you what, it's not the time to do. It's not the time for cuts.
Opposition leader Peter Dutton says there will be a recession, seemingly only under Labor.
The Treasurer of our country is talking about, obviously, the prospect of a recession or a recession coming very quickly. And that's why he's talking about 50 points reduction in interest rates, unless he's just doing that for political reasons. But if he believes that it's necessary to drop interest rates by 50 points in a month's time, he's telling Australians that there are difficult times ahead under Labor. That's exactly what he's doing.
The Greens, for their part, are calling on the Reserve Bank to meet ahead of schedule to cut interest rates now, ahead of more economic headwinds.
The RBA doesn't meet monthly like it used to. It is 6 weeks away from the next RBA board meeting. So the Greens want to see the RBA actually convene an urgent board meeting, make the right decision, which is to bring interest rates down. Do it now, not in 6 weeks' time. And that would provide some much needed real relief to people who've got mortgages.
Well, Peter Dutton today claimed Australia will fall into recession if Labor is re-elected, in an attempt to try to get on the front foot on the economy and essentially reframe the election campaign as a big contest on economic management. Now, the share market rebounded following smaller falls overnight on Wall Street, but today both leaders, Peter Dutton and Anthony Albanese, have been talking up their own economic credentials. They're trying to capitalise on voters' anxiety about the economy and their jobs and their businesses. Now, this comes after a few shaky days for the opposition leader. Yesterday, dumping his working from home policy. Today, he used the Treasurer's own words to suggest that Labor is preparing us for a recession. Now, the coalition has historically campaigned on the premise that they are the better economic managers. Labor has been building a case to contest this. So today was Peter Dutton's attempt to try and remake this argument so that he can exploit, if you like, the political conditions, the economic conditions to try and give himself an advantage after a few very difficult days. Tonight, both leaders face off at the Sky News People's Forum in Western Sydney. This will be a pivotal moment for them. They will be asked questions that they won't expect from undecided voters. Anthony Albanese was judged as the winner against Scott Morrison last time he did one of these forums. So it will be really fascinating to see how they both perform tonight. Well, to the state of the election race early in week 2, let's bring in our regular Tuesday panel. Sean Kelly is an author and columnist for the Nine Papers, a former advisor to 2 Labor Prime Ministers. Andrew Carswell is a former Prime Minister's advisor to Scott Morrison. He now works as a consultant. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Good to be here.
Andrew, beginning with you, it was a pretty difficult couple of days for the Coalition. Just have to take you back to yesterday's backflip in an election campaign. I haven't seen a backflip during a campaign like this. What did you think of the way that Peter Dutton did that and framed that?
Well, first of all, I think it was incredibly important that they did this backflip. I think it was important to scrub this policy from their books. It was a dog's breakfast of a policy from day one, and I think the Coalition kind of knew that. They knew that there was inherent risk in this one. They left a bit of a vacuum by not explaining it well, so it allowed Labor to come in and fill that void with an almighty scare campaign, basically lying to Australian women that Peter Dutton was going to take away their ability to work from home, whether they worked in the public or private sector. So it wasn't well explained and it needed to be erased. And I think the most important thing here is that they made that decision quickly and they stuck the landing on this. The backflip was well handled. It was well managed. Unless you were living under a rock, you would have seen the contrition that was shown, the apology that was shown, and I think that's important. Every Australian woman needed to hear that yesterday, and I think they would have done that. So I'm pleased that they stuck the landing. These things have a habit of kind of dragging out for a couple of days, but they managed to keep it to kind of a day and a half, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, Sean, you've watched backflips. They don't usually happen during the election campaign. Backflips happen all the time, can I say? Politicians change their minds and, reframe things, but not during a campaign. In terms of how they landed it and the way Peter Dutton framed it, what did you think?
Well, first of all, as somebody who was working for Julia Gillard during the 2010 campaign, it wasn't a backflip, but the real Julia moment was obviously an indication of the difficulties that campaign was facing early on. I think it's important to say to everybody watching this campaign, and probably particularly to any Labor people who are getting ahead of themselves a little, that a lot of campaigns start badly and end fairly well. So that brings me to the second point, which is, I think Peter Dutton did a pretty good job. He made a big enough splash with it. There seemed to be a kind of not great plan to do this very softly over the weekend. That obviously didn't land, didn't really get noticed by anyone. The actual delivery of it, dropping it to the newspapers, following it up with early interviews, I thought was pretty good. It did make a pretty big splash. The very great difficulty for the Coalition, though, and Labor's been campaigning on this basis since the beginning of the year, is whether or not things actually have time to sink into voters during the campaign. I think Andrew is right that it would have reached a lot of voters, but fewer and fewer voters we know are paying attention to the mainstream news media. Labor has factored that into the way that it has developed its entire campaign. That's part of the reason all of the announcements were out quite early, because there was a sense in Labor that they needed that time to filter through. Now, Peter Dutton, in a sense, is running the exact opposite strategy. He is having to make announcements during the campaign, and that is also what leaves him vulnerable to moments like this, because Anthony Albanese, in a way, has this very easy run of being able to announce pretty banal but big spending announcements like the mental health announcement. Good, but certainly not controversial, not difficult to back in. Nobody's going to attack him for it, while Peter Dutton still has to make up some ground on the policy front, and that makes his campaign, I think, fundamentally more difficult. Yeah,
it was interesting, wasn't it, Andrew, that he went in and kind of owned that they made a mistake. They're really trying to emphasise authenticity in the owning of the mistake and apologising. But to the point Sean was making, getting that cut through so voters notice that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think people need to see the genuineness in what is coming across, particularly with that contrition. And I think Peter showed that in spades on Monday. So there will be a believability kind of factor there, whether people look at that and see genuineness in what is presented. And as I said, I think that's right. This is straight out of the school of Peter Beattie, isn't it, in Queensland, where, the word sorry was almost in the daily talking points. It can work in your favour. You can turn it into a positive by being upfront, by showing that you are listening and that you are amending your script based on what you're hearing from the public, and I think that's a positive.
Yeah, I think the public does generally like politicians who kind of are very truthful about the process, but yeah, you don't see it enough, I think, in politics. I want to talk about today's economic pivot. So we've got both sides, Sean, who are trying to argue that the economic headwinds, which are clearly coming for the world because of Donald Trump's carnage, and really that's what he's doing here. We might be facing a global recession. It will hit Australia unless we are very lucky, and we've been lucky in the past, so let's hope that happens again. But they're both framing it as being better for either side, Sean. Who does it advantage, realistically? Because the coalition has historically argued they are better economic managers. Peter Dutton was singing from that script today.
Look, I think this is a really difficult question. I think traditionally, absolutely, economic difficulties tend to favour the coalition. However, structurally, at the moment, you do seem to be seeing simply the favouring of incumbents amidst the Trump chaos. Perhaps particularly left-wing incumbents, and that's a different structural thing. That's not something we really have a historical comparison with. So I think both sides are really trying to make the case, but in the end, I'm not sure the arguments here really will make a great deal of difference. And I think this is true of a lot of things in this campaign. I made this point last week in a different form that I think external factors are really dominating this campaign. Obviously, Patricia, you would have had this experience. Everybody you speak to over the last month or two wants to talk about Donald Trump. That's at the top of everybody's minds. And I think the way that Trump pushes voters is not going to be determined by what Anthony Albanese or Jim Chalmers or Peter Dutton says. It's going to be a structural sense, and at the moment that seems to be favouring Labor.
Yeah, what do you make of it? I wonder if Peter Dutton's argument that you should switch sides now, Andrew, is going to cut it.
Well, I think it's probably a nil-all draw in this one. There's advantages from both sides. The advantage for Peter Dutton is that he gets to examine what Labor has and hasn't done over the last 3 years, and why Australia's economy is in the state that it is in now at this point in time. Why are we facing high insolvency rates for businesses? Why is the economy only suffering weak growth at the moment? So it allows that kind of attack point to really go on it. It also goes to the point of his experience in dealing with the Trump administration as well, 1.0, and him being at the forefront of that with Morrison and Turnbull, being able to negotiate deals with this administration, which the Albanese government has not done to this extent. But on the flip side, there's advantages here for Albanese because it gives him a platform to show strength where Australians may have looked at his leadership through weakness. This gives him ability to stand strong and show that he can be strong in the face of adversity. It also allows them to roll out their chief communications guy, Jim Chalmers. I mean, here's the perfect opportunity to roll Jim straight into a campaign, and he is the best communicator in Parliament. So that's advantage to them too. I agree with Sean on incumbency. Incumbency gives you that platform. So I think there's some advantages of both sides. It really comes down to the delivery. I
have to ask about this dumped candidate for Whitlam, Ben Britton. He had a bit to say on 2GB this morning about people trying to potentially roll Peter Dutton, get rid of him as leader in a factional fight. I'm going to stay with you, Andrew, because it was, you've worked for that side of politics. Not exactly a helpful contribution from this ex-candidate today for the Liberal Party's campaign.
What do you say, Patricia, that the New South Wales Liberal division is dysfunctional and is filled with factional infighting? I never would have said that. Look, I think the right decision was made here very, very quickly. And you have to make these decisions quickly because they hang around like a bad stench. What this gentleman said was unacceptable. Outside of an election contest, who knows what would have happened, but you have to get rid of the distraction straight away. We learnt this in 2019 with the candidate for Lions who made some racist comments. We tried to stick with it for a day and it cost us 3 days on the campaign. You can't afford that at this stage of the campaign. You've got to cut the head off straight away.
Yeah, that's a really good memory. I remember that now.
Not a good memory for me.
Not for you, but it's a very apt memory. Thank you for bringing those historical examples, and when you don't deal with them quickly, Sean, they do grow. It's not like they go away and it's all media moves on, and people actually hound you for it, don't they, when you're a leader?
Look, they absolutely do, and distractions tend to beget other distractions, and I think you can see that here. Ben Brennan's been talking about the fact that his views on women in the military are shared by Andrew Hastie, the Shadow Defence spokesperson for the coalition. The Liberals have put out a statement. Peter Dutton has very quickly said, no, I support women in all roles in the Defence Forces, as he should have. Exactly the right thing from Peter Dutton, but he also said Andrew Hastie shares his view, and the Liberal Party then put out a statement which, to be honest, to me was a bit unclear, seemed to be very carefully worded without actually expressing what Andrew Hastie's current viewpoint was. So I wonder now if this is going to bleed a little bit further, unless Andrew Hastie comes out very quickly, because again, Andrew is right, you have to squash these things quickly, and I felt that the coalition hasn't quite squashed this one yet.
Yeah, let's see. I think that's an interesting point. Just finally, tonight is the first of the debates, the Sky People's Forum, where they take undecided voters' questions, and this has happened before. I will ask you, Andrew, because the last one, you're working for Scott Morrison, and Anthony Albanese beat him. So what do you have to do ahead of these things?
Well, it's actually very hard for an incumbent Prime Minister to win a debate. It's very, very rare that it actually happens. It always skews towards the opposition leader. So hopefully that continues tonight. But look, this is an important moment for Peter Dutton. In fact, this week arguably is the most important week of his political career. Whether he can correct the ship a little bit and gain a little bit of momentum heading into what is a protracted pause in the campaign over Easter.
Now, next week, to be clear, David Spears and the ABC will have our debate, so this is not the only debate, and our one's going to be the best one. It is, but, you know, tonight is undecided voters. I think that's important too. So, Sean, they often can ask questions that are unexpected, right?
Oh, look, absolutely. They are really good at giving you a sense of the fact that voters are not always talking about the things that the press gallery is talking about. They can give you a sense of, you know, issues that come from left field or right field. They really can surprise candidates, and in doing so, they can test the breadth of knowledge of the candidates, because, of course, the leaders come prepped on all the usual topics, but how much have they actually talked to regular people over the last few years? In a way, tonight is a testing ground for that.
Tonight certainly is. Always great to pick your brains and find out what happened in the olden days. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Staying with tariffs, Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor says Treasury should have modelled what the economic impact of reciprocal tariffs would be on the Australian economy.
You would have thought a Treasurer who understands economics, understands economic history, and he clearly doesn't, would say to the Treasury Secretary, can you please have a look at this? What's it mean for our economy? What's it going to do to the global economy? And most importantly, what's it going to do to the Australian economy? He hasn't asked for that. I spoke with the Treasury Secretary. It is clear the Treasurer has not asked for that.
I want to bring in Independent Senator Jacqui Lambie. Senator, welcome.
Good afternoon.
You've previously called for the government to stand up to Donald Trump on tariffs. They obviously have been pretty clear since his tariff announcement about their views on the tariffs and not wanting to do any deal. Are you happy with the response you've seen?
We don't need to go back with them in tariffs, because we have four big things here. One of them says critical minerals. The other one is the top of the Northern Territory there. where we have the rotation of the US Marines, which the next rotation you say don't bother, you take your rotation home and there won't be one replacing it. We have Pine Gap, which we can use, and we could use that tomorrow. I'm sure that'd be a great bargaining chip. I'd love to be sitting at the table for that one. And then, of course, in the Indian Ocean there, the US submarines rely very heavily on the communication section that we have there on that satellite that we have sitting there that belongs to us. And without that, they're stuffed. So, you know what, there are things that you can go and do which do not involve tariffs, that you can go at the US and really hold them accountable for a few things and just say, nah, come back to the table, otherwise we're going to switch this stuff off. But they don't have the guts to do that, OK? They're still sitting on a fence here. This is how I see them. There is no retaliation. It doesn't matter who it's from. I've got Peter Dutton out there gobbing off about saying he'd see me. Well, that's great. You've had the last 8 weeks to get in and see him as an opposition leader. Nothing coming from there. So you've got nothing new on the table, Peter Dutton, let's be honest here. And then you've got him, Albanese goes, I'm really not sure how to handle this situation. They're just sitting on the fence. What do we do here? I don't know, you might want to bring in some military boys and actually maybe take some, ask them for their opinion on how we retaliate here, that you can have very quick fixes with. That
suggestion of using our defence relationship as a sort of trading or bargaining chip over tariffs. Very, very senior people, including, of course, former Prime Minister John Howard, have said we should never use those as leverage.
Well, that's why I don't agree. I don't agree with John Howard. I think it's absolute bloody rubbish. And you're not doing anything on your trade. You have defence here. You have 3,000 Marines sitting at the top of Northern Territory. Tell them they're no longer welcome. Very sorry, that's the way it is. No offence to them. All right, start getting tough here. You're dealing with Donald Trump, and in the meantime, we've got 2 weak leaders that go, I just don't know what to do about this. Well, you keep doing that every day because the way you are dealing with it now is not working. It is not working. You are failing. So put your big boy pants on and toughen up. Toughen up. That's what needs to be done, PK, and it's not getting done. And people have had a gutful of it. They're screaming out for leadership in this country. Here is your perfect opportunity to see what you're made of, and you are completely missing the mark. I just say that.
Do you really think that Peter Dutton, as an opposition leader, could have really got a meeting with Donald Trump over the last couple of months?
He's had his mates over there. He's, he's using his own people, saying his own people have got good contacts with him. He's saying he's got good relationships in there. Well, why not? Why not? I just find it absolutely bizarre. He can't go back and say, you know what, we did a deal with them with Malcolm Turnbull. I'm sorry, it's a whole different scenario here, and you know what, it's a whole new year, and he's come down Trump has come down a whole lot tougher. That is not going to work. So going out there and gobbing off and saying, I can fix this, when you haven't at all, and even as opposition leader, and you've got mates, Gina Reinhart, they were all sitting at the table on the bloody Trump night, for God's sake. None of them have been able to do anything. I bet you they're sitting there going, I wish I wasn't sitting on that table because I've now had tariffs thrown at me.
I imagine, that business is pretty concerned about the tariffs. Peter Dutton today claimed Australia will fall into recession if Labor is re-elected. Now, that's obviously because of what we're seeing in the wake of Trump's tariffs. Are you worried Australia is going to fall into an election? We are in an election. Fall into a recession? And does whoever's in power matter?
I have to be honest with you, I could see us going into recession 18 months ago. I've been speaking about this. I live in one of the top 10 poorest electorates, and I can see what's been going on in there in the last 18 months. And I'll tell you what's been going on the last 3 months. I've never seen so many shops close. And this is before the Trump stuff. So we have got some issues out there with the economy. And this is without those tariffs hitting us. We were already in trouble. All right, so I think people need to stop using the blame game as tariffs because we're already heading there. The tariffs now has just been a big blow over the top of us, which is not helpful.
So the warning from Peter Dutton that there would be a recession under Labor, I mean, he didn't say it explicitly, he was asked, but do you get a different outcome for a potential recession based on who you vote for as your government?
No, I don't think so. I think it's too far gone. The best thing that you can't turn, you can't go this far down and be this close to recession and say, I'll be able to fix this overnight. It just doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, we will probably have to go through a recession, and that is the truth of the matter.
That's pretty devastating for people. I think people are feeling pretty nervous at the moment. I was just thinking, actually, Jacqui Lambie, about how people have gone through first COVID, then the inflation crisis, and now if we're really facing a Trump-led recession, that's 3 huge shocks for people. Yep. How are people going to cope with that? I mean, that is incredibly stressful over a long period of time.
OK, what I do know about Australians, they're extremely tough. Sometimes we don't feel like that, but we are. We are extremely tough. We live in tough climate conditions, all the rest, and we are tough to get through this, and we'll always get through what we need to get through. So as much as that's going to be tough, we've been through worse, you know, since we've become a country. So, you know what, you just got to put your seatbelt on, you've got to keep that cash close, and you've just got to try and continue to put that bread and milk on the table somehow. I don't know what else to say to you, and I do believe it's going to get tougher. I won't sit here, you know, and I put icing on the cake for you. I won't do that, because I'll tell you how I see it out there on the ground, PK, and it's not pretty. Yeah,
I think people have been under pressure, and now I can imagine they're under a lot of pressure. I just want to ask you before I let you go, and it's been great to speak to you this afternoon, but it's a story that's happened, but given your own experience with the ADF, I think that you would no doubt have noticed. The Liberals have now dumped their candidate for Whitlam, Ben Britton. He has spoken, there were comments found from him about women, they shouldn't serve in the Defence Force, was a previous comment in combat roles, I should be very specific. And the Liberal Party has since dumped him. He went on radio and said, well, Andrew Hastie, who is the defence spokesperson for the Liberals, also has said this. Now, Andrew Hastie said this some time ago, but he is in this role. What do you make of that view about women in combat roles?
I want to make sure this is very clear and he hears me loud and clear. First of all, we have about 15% which are female in the military, about 12% of them army. You'll have 1% less that are combat females. And I'm one of those combat females. And I'll tell you what happens to boys like that. They get taken out the back and those females deal with them. That's what happens out the back in uniform. So while he's gobbing off, I find it very offensive. My body is broken for that. I would never, ever not do my time in the military again and become one of those combat females. It's one of the proudest moments of my life to say that I've been one of those combat females. I don't care what it's done to my body, but to know that I can stand out with those boys on that front line and take it right up to them and have earned that, with those men, and for him to come out and say that, I find that absolutely disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. Because I'm telling you, if he was in a combat unit with me, he would have been fixed up in about a split second, and that would have stopped. And he knows it, and so do I.
Well, Andrew Hastie, to be clear, has not come out and said that he thinks this. At this point in time, I've not heard him say that. I'm not talking about Hastie. I'm talking about the other idiot out there. And I will say that from one military person to the next, from one veteran to another to him, right now today, and being one of those combat girls, one of those first combat with females in uniform. And I will never regret doing my time in combat with those boys, not ever. Yeah, I'm sure women heard that and would have been concerned to have heard it. Thank you so much, Senator.
Thank you so much for having me on, PK. Good on you.
Well, the election campaign could matter more than in any recent memory, with research suggesting there are more undecided voters than ever. ABC elections analyst Casey Briggs looks at how Australian politics is changing and how swing voters will decide the election for a new ABC series launching today.
Australia's become a nation of swingers.
We've tried it before and trying it now.
Just get down and really get stuck into it.
This seems to be the trend these days.
Politically, at least.
There was undoubtedly a swing.
We have taken a swing against us.
I even have a sort of cane in my hand.
Back in the 1960s, more than 70% of us said we always vote for the same party. But by 2022, that had nearly halved to just 37%. If you're a politician, that's a lot more people up for grabs.
World's best.
Righto, cheers.
There are far more swinging soft voters than there's ever been at any time in Australian history.
It's a very tiring business.
This is politics, and you'd expect them to play it this way.
I mean, really, is that what you expect?
Something has changed, and this graph is what it's all about. It used to be the case that the major parties would reliably get more than 40% of the primary vote. That primary vote has fallen and fallen. All the while, the primary vote for everyone else has grown and grown.
That's fabulous.
And I want to find out why.
I spoke to Casey Briggs a short time ago. Casey, welcome to the program.
Thanks, PK. Good to see you.
So, Casey, we know how soft the electorate has been, soft voters, that is. They haven't been in either column. Going into this election, does it seem like people are starting to make up their minds now?
Yeah, we've had this extraordinary large number of undecided people who say their vote isn't locked in going into this campaign. The figures do look like they're coming down a bit. People are starting to make up their mind, and I think the way they are making up their mind has been good news for the government. We've seen, that the government is making up ground in opinion polling, and it seems like people that are now only getting around to deciding in the final weeks of this campaign just before election day, as is people's right, we should say. People are totally entitled to make up their mind at whatever point they want. They're choosing to make up their mind now, and they seem to be breaking more for the government than for the opposition. But of course, with an extraordinary large number of soft voters, there are still an extraordinary large number of people to make up their mind, and they could go either way.
Now, candidates are trying very hard to control the framing of the election. Why are they doing that? And from the first week and a half of the campaign, what can we tell about the preferred territory?
Yeah, it's the time of the electoral cycle we hear the words choice and a very binary sort of framing of every issue from both of the men who'd like to be Prime Minister in May. Look, they're playing to the people who are, quite frankly, probably not watching afternoon briefing. The people who are less politically engaged, don't have all that much time to watch the news and pay attention to politics. This is a pretty typical portrait of what a swing and undecided voter is. And so we rely on these shortcuts. This is something Australian politicians have done for a very long time, something that's done the world over. And Dr. Jill Shepherd from the Australian National University explains for our show Swingers tonight sort of why they're doing it.
It's about convincing voters that this election is about health, or this election is about security, and that while we've got their brains primed to think about those two things, they will potentially vote differently. It's not a particularly inspiring or edifying way of running politics, but in a compulsory voting system where everyone's going to turn out, all we have to do is get voters' brains turned on to the thing that we want our voters thinking about.
Yeah, that's how the sausage is made. Look, one of the things you've done for Swingers, which I think is fascinating, and those of us who are political junkies, and I think anyone who watches this show knows that's definitely me, is actually being able to watch a focus group in action. Now, focus groups are basically really pivotal in basically leaders framing their messages to know what matters to voters. What happened? Tell me about this.
Yeah, we really wanted to get an understanding, PK, of the kind of research that campaigns do, and focus groups are a large part of that. They're doing sort of big, broad national opinion polling all the time. That tells you something, but focus groups are where you get a lot more of the detail of how people are thinking. They're smaller groups. The group that we commissioned for the ABC, and we asked Redbridge Group to run that group for us and find us 9 undecided voters in the seat of McEwen. That's in northern outer Melbourne, a very key seat if Peter Dutton wants to come close or take government come May. The reason you have these groups is to get a better understanding of not just what the top issues are, but how people are thinking about them, how they might be able to be influenced. Campaigns will use them to test their messages, to test their advertising, to think about how they can do what's called issue manipulation. Really get the issues that they would like this election to be fought on in the forefront of people's minds. So they're a really important tool for a campaign. I guarantee you they're being run near constantly at the moment by the two major parties. And so, and I should say, candidates and MPs even don't usually get to see this kind of research, let alone journalists and members of the public. So it's been really interesting to be able to share that, film a group for this program, Swingers, and share it with the world. We got a lot of insights into how people are thinking about this campaign, but also how voters really see the political class on the whole, and that was particularly fascinating.
They're on these massive salaries that are paid by people like us who are having to pick up extra jobs and extra hours, but to them, you know, they don't even have to look at their bank accounts before going to the shops.
I think they need to accept the fact that they're not celebrities. They just like to have these big moments. You know, they'll be shaking everyone's hand and, you know, making it all about them.
There's really this perception among undecided voters in particular that is, I think, increasing, that the political class, politicians and political advisors, they come from this other world. There is a world of the political class and there is the world of everyone else. This concept that politicians are not celebrities, and a real frustration and cynicism that politicians and our political leaders will follow through and do what they say they would do. I've got to tell you, that came through so strongly in this focus group we conducted in McEwen. So many interesting insights there, PK, and I can't wait for everyone to see the whole thing.
Well, you know, I think that is a very big sentiment, that politicians don't put their own hand in their own pockets, that things are all paid for them, and people, when they're doing it tough, are going to feel pretty frustrated if they believe that is the way politicians operate. Casey, can't wait to watch it. Thank you.
Thanks, PK.
Well, keeping our focus on voters, a new research paper by the ANU this week showed Australian voters are not polarised like they are in the United States. They're also not enthusiastic, but they are uncertain and ambivalent. Professor Nicholas Biddle is the head of the ANU's School of Politics and International Relations. He authored the research and he joins me now. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on.
So you looked at long-term data, which is a big sample of voters, to find out what their sentiments were. What was most surprising to you?
Yeah, so we followed more than 3,500 Australians. We've been undertaking our surveys for quite a few years. And I guess what's really interesting is, you know, Australians don't have very negative views towards the other party. That's kind of what we think about with polarisation. A country which is polarised is if you support one party, then you'll have very negative views towards the other. And that's not what we see in Australian data. We certainly see Australians having relatively low views towards their politicians, but not in a extreme, we like one party, we hate the other.
Yeah, and that's really very distinctive to the other country we are constantly talking about, which is the United States, particularly since Donald Trump. We are pretty energised, I think, as a nation about the way their democracy works. In America, it is incredibly polarised. We are very different to that. Why do you think that's happening?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. One is the old chestnut, compulsory voting. If everyone needs to go to the electoral booth, then there's very little incentive to really wind up your own party. There's very little incentive to be extreme as a major party. What you're really trying to do is attract and speak to those in the middle and not do it in a way where you're coming across as negative towards not just the other party but voters of that other party.
The other thing in your study, it looked at lots of different attitudes to things like spending. And what I found really interesting is that from the financial crisis, those of us old enough to remember it, to now, people are more reluctant to see big government spending, which is interesting because we're having discussions at the moment about government spending. What did it find?
Yeah, so certainly Australians are they're worried about debts, they're worried about government debt, they're worried about deficits. So I do think that not only the experience of the COVID and the inflationary period has meant that Australians are less likely to see, spending our way out of a difficult financial position is a policy which they support.
So the study obviously looks at broader voting trends and the way people see the democracy. We often talk about a crisis in democracy, that things aren't working. We just spoke to Casey Briggs, who's got his own piece going to air tonight, which is looking at swinging voters, for instance. In your assessment, from having done these studies, talking to a large group of voters, do you think our democracy is in good health in Australia?
Yeah, it's always tempting to compare ourselves to the worst and compare ourselves to what's happening in the US and see, we're not as bad as what's happening over there. And that is true. So it is true that our institutions are more trusted than in many comparable countries. It's true that, as I said, Australians aren't overly polarised. And it's also true that there's very little hatred towards our political class in Australia. That doesn't mean that our institutions don't need to continue to evolve. It doesn't mean that our politicians are doing a good job at explaining what the policy challenges are and identifying a consensus approach to deal with those policy challenges. It just means that our institutions are holding up better than they are in some other countries.
Yeah. The two words, though, that do deserve a bit of a look and perhaps are a little worrying are that Australians feel uncertain and ambivalent. Yep. So it's, of course, great not to be polarised and not to hate your fellow citizens. I don't think we should live in a country like that. Most people would agree, I reckon. But ambivalence and feeling uncertain are not necessarily positive things either, are they, Nicholas? Like, sometimes that can be a bit of a disengagement as well. Is that the sense you get from having talked to voters over a long period of time, that there is more of a disengagement?
Yeah, certainly we find that people aren't satisfied with their own life. One of the things which is quite clear in our data is that life satisfaction continues to decline, that financial stress hasn't come down from during the peak inflationary period. So I guess what that shows to us is that there is a real stress, a real anxiety which people are experiencing, and they're not seeing the political class as having solutions to that. You take housing as an example. It feels to people like it's an intractable problem. It feels to people like there's no really well-articulated solution to what many of our respondents identify as being one of their core issues.
Gender is also a really significant issue and there's a lot of analysis at the moment with a lot of the polling that's coming out, which is a bit more immediate about the election. Are you seeing some gender trends also in the data?
Yeah, what's really interesting for us is that and this was actually true in the US as well, is that people's gender is not as predictive of their voting behaviour as their view is towards gender issues. If you really want to look at how gender is influencing people's votes, then you need to go deeper than just asking someone's own identity. You need to ask them about how they feel about the situation of males and females in the country, the trajectory, how equality is or isn't being delivered. And I think that's much more predictive of how people are going to vote than their own identity themselves.
It's always so interesting to find out how voters feel about democracy and our country. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Dr. Nicholas Biddle there, who's done this research, and I wrote a piece for ABC News about this that you can find on our website. You can also, if you're really into all these topics, listen to Politics Now this afternoon. We've done a special episode on all of the swinging seats in the western suburbs of Sydney. There are many of them, and that's available on your podcast feed or the ABC Listen app, which I urge you to get if you haven't already. Well, that's Afternoon Briefing for today. Thank you so much for your company. Stay with us here on ABC News. Joe O'Brien is up next with today's top stories. I'll see you tomorrow.